All right. Hey, as we mentioned earlier, let's talk about actually. So we I think we teased or mentioned this. I think it was on the show. I know we talked about it before the show that the Netflix recently aired a documentary, but they're calling it a documentary.
It is.
Yeah. On Netflix about the the Glatzel possession / Bono murder from the early 1980s, which was the subject of many different made-for-TV movies, and most recently a feature film, The Conjuring 3, which came out in 2021. Anyway, so here we got another stab at this story. So I figured we'll talk about some of the quote. The real events. I suppose. And
are you saying that with air quotes? The real events?
Well, I guess I'll say we'll talk about the events as they were, as we understand them, how they were, shown or portrayed in the documentary, which follows for the most part the stories as we have been told for decades now, and some other information that maybe leads to some questions about this whole Mishigas. So, John, I know you were hot on this documentary. You like this sort of thing. Did you actually get a chance to watch it?
Yeah, I think I have watched about 75% of it before I got either sidetracked or perhaps in my old age fell asleep.
I love the percentage. I have no percentage.
It's a good
no
ballpark.
idea what percentage I watched of the Night of the Living Dead.
It's an okay produced documentary. I didn't know what to expect. When we talked about it, I had not seen a trailer or anything. And I thought it was going to be, some people talking about this murder trial and be some stock footage and then when it cuts to the guy sitting in a chair going, hi, I was possessed by a demon when I was 11 years old. I'm like, they have the guy and they have his family. Right. And he says the first time he's spoken on camera about any of this. And I just okay, now this is something I want to watch. And so when I was fading, I think is probably when I stopped it because I'm like, I'm going to fall asleep during this, but it's not the best made documentary ever. Have you watched any of it? You haven't, Kat. Have you any of it, Will? You watch it?
Didn't get a chance.
I watched it.
Okay,
okay.
It's they say every photograph and every audio sample is real, but they reenacted scenes. Of course, they had no video footage of things that took place. And some of the pictures and audio stuff is, if you can believe it was undoctored, it's pretty weird. It's pretty unbelievable.
Interesting.
Speaking of that, I do have an audio clip from one of the recordings that were made by the Warrens, who were the protagonists in the Conjuring films and some other films. Were the demonologist in the Amityville Horror. Behind that story too. I do have a clip of an audio clip that they made during the exorcism of David Glatzel, who John's talking about.
Get out of my son. Get out of my son. Come on, son. Come on, get away from me. No, I'm your mother. David. Wake up. Get up. He's the Holy Mommy loves you. Mommy loves you. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. You can't get him up here. Get up! My God, get up!
Yeah.
Oh my.
Not a whole lot of David there, but like John was pointing out, I mean, the kid speaks in that sort of low registered voice, very growly. Swears obscenities at his mother. Says Jesus will die in hell. Calls his mother a douchebag.
Oh my.
Okay. Some funny things too. But I saw one critique of the doc.
Hold on a second. Before we go any further, I need to know.
That was amazing.
I need to know your attitude toward demonic possession. Do you think it's total bullshit? Is there something to it? Because I think that foundation is important as we talk about this thing. So I sprung it on you, so I'll start first.
Okay.
I don't know that I believe in demons or angels or anything, but I certainly believe in extra normal, paranormal, something beyond our senses. I believe it's possible that there is some sort of energy left over that could do something. The religious aspect I'm on, but I don't think it's BS. I think there's something to it. So
okay.
Yeah. What do you think? So Will is having an out-of-body experience. What about you, Kat?
Definitely is. He's looking for body parts or something.
Yeah, I'm looking for this book here.
I'm with you, John. I'm not. I don't. It's not something I believe. Like, oh, that actually happened. But I'm open to the possibility that there are things that can happen that I, don't happen to believe in, or that I might not fully understand.
So you're open to that, though you don't have a belief, but you're open to the possibility. Is that fair?
Yes, because
okay.
I'm sort of I don't say, oh, never. I don't say that could never happen. But I'm not a believer. Yes.
Yeah, I guess, John, first, you said something about some sort of energy, something left behind. That's where I reached for this book. To that extent, I recommend this book by parapsychologist Brandon Masulo, who was a guest on the show, one of our very first guests. What he advances here as far as accounting for spirits, it's a scientific thing that is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
And it's that essentially we're all made up of, electromagnetism. The earth is made of electromagnetism. And in short, when we pass on or when we do activities, I'm oversimplifying it, that the earth itself is like a solid state drive. And different things, including us, events, etc., can get stored in it. And folks experiencing what they would think of as supernatural activity, or ghosts, etc., feelings or, of something happening or even seeing something, he believes there's people having this ability to sort of being hypersensitive to this electromagnetic energy, this data that's stored.
Okay.
That doesn't account. And if you believe that, then that doesn't account for possession. And therefore, if you think this is the only thing that accounts for all sort of paranormal activity, there is no possession because these things are just recorded. They're not interactive. It's basically like you see in some of these sci-fi films where they're able to play a moment that happened. Like Minority Report, I think, has something like that. But as far as demons and possessing people, I don't believe in that. I think it's a crock of shit. I think lending to that is this idea, which is fascinating to me, is that, like in this Glatzel story that we'll talk about, ultimately they have this kid exercise. So I guess just quickly, in short, what happened is this family, the Glatzel family, moved into a home in the 1980s, in 1980 to be specific. And immediately the young boy, David, who was 11, starts saying he's feeling weird things. He does claim he saw like a figure at different times, including at night. He saw it out in the woods. He saw the face of this figure in the darkness, I think, inside of his home. And he wanted to get the hell out of there. And they didn't believe him. They thought, he's a kid, whatever. Ultimately, he starts acting out. His visions get, worse. He starts speaking in that voice and cursing at his family and that sort of thing. Right. And so it becomes a real, it's a real burden for the family to be dealing with this. Yeah. So the family contacts Ed and Lorraine Warren. Again, the demonologists from those Conjuring films. They're real life people, or they were. Right. They're no longer with us.
Yep.
And they get I think this is the right order. They get a priest involved to do an exorcism, which is what I played you that clip of. You hear the mother and I think Lorraine talking about trying to get the demon to leave. That's a bunch of crap. So they get this kid exorcised, and I think in the documentary they simplify it. I remember in The Conjuring 3 they simplified it. They do the exorcism, and during the exorcism, David's soon-to-be brother-in-law, so his sister's fiance, Arnie Johnson, says, "Don't pick on this kid. You want to pick on somebody? Pick on someone your own size. Take me." Paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And the exorcism comes to an end. One thing they don't mention is the Warrens claim that they exorcised 41 demons from David, not just one. 41, I think it was. 41. It was over 40. Anyway,
I think it said 42, and I just thought it was ironic because that's the, it's the Hitchhiker's Guide, the magical number, life, universe, and everything kind of thing.
Universe and everything.
Because I think the number you remember in the article was that in the film The Conjuring 3, they omitted 41 of them to not confuse the issue.
Okay, that's what it is. 41
because that would
one.
make it sound less believable that there were 42 demons.
Right. Yeah. And so they claim they do that, and then months later, I don't know, how was it, John? 9 months later, Arnie Johnson, who I told you about, is will be the brother-in-law ultimately of David, the possessed kid. So the kid's fine now for months. After the exorcism, he's fine. Then what happens is Arnie Johnson, who at the time is 19, his sister Wanda and his fiancée Debbie Glatzel, her cousin Mary and Debbie's employer, who's also her landlord and Arnie's landlord because they're living together. His name is Alan Bono. Mm-hmm. They go to lunch at a bar. And over the course of the afternoon, Bono drinks to a point where he's belligerent. Mm-hmm. And Johnson suggests to the girls, let's get out of here. We don't want to be around this guy.
Right.
And apparently, according to the story anyway, Bono starts roughly handling the young girl, Mary, mm-hmm. which mm-hmm. makes Johnson really angry, who then gets into a fight with Bono, pulls out a pocket knife, and stabs Bono repeatedly. Bono dies a few hours later from the wounds. Johnson is found about 2 miles away from the scene of the crime. When he's picked up, he says he doesn't know what happened. He's told you killed your friend. He doesn't remember what happened since mm-hmm. being at the bar and being found on the side of the road. Again, what the documentary covers is ultimately his attorneys decide, in the Warrens, with the Warrens in the family, they put 2 and 2 together, so to speak, and they realize, hey, jackass, you shouldn't be asking demons to come and possess you when we're exorcising them. That's what happened. That's why you killed them. This demon went in you. So they find an attorney who's willing to take on this case to argue that it's the first in the U.S. Now, it's the first in the U.S. that, prepared to argue that you're not guilty by means of, demonic possession.
Demonic possession, yep.
According to the attorney in the documentary, it had been successfully argued, this type of defense in England, in the UK, 3 times prior, but never in the U.S. Mm-hmm. Now, I take issue with this whole title of this thing, Devil on Trial, or any of the articles about it, because as John knows, for even just watching 75% of the documentary,
yep.
they never argue that it was a defense based on demonic possession, because they go to the judge, hey, this is what we want to do. And the judge says, yeah, you're not doing that.
Right.
No, you can't. Yeah. What are you going to bring in for evidence? No, forget it. We're not doing that.
That was the foundation on which they wanted to build a case. And they're like, you can believe that, but you can't actually use that as the defense because it's indefensible. It's unprovable. Mm-hmm. Yeah. As far as we know, as far as anyone knows, it's unprovable.
Yeah. I mean, what would you bring in? Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So
it's gonna be like Miracle on 34th Street. I call to the stand the devil. Yeah. Well, I do have the devil's mail here, so perhaps we could deliver the devil letters to the devil to this guy. Right.
Then what would he swear on a stack of? Yeah, the devil, that is. Or what would he swear on? What book?
A book.
Karen says, are you guys familiar with the McMartin's trial? I went down a rabbit hole recently doing an article about the Satanic Panic for the Retro Network.
Yeah,
yes.
Wow.
That's another one. Where, the devil got maligned.
Falsely accused.
Look, this is an era. Yeah, this is an era of, and what's that book called? Michelle Remembers or Remembered. That an era where this concept of demonic possession and people eating babies and worshiping the devil and, hypnosis used to recall events that you had buried that involved, this is when it's all happening. So it's not surprising that this is advanced.
Yes.
Anyway, so then Arnie, they switch their defense and he starts arguing self-defense. And the jury sentences him to 20 years. He does 5. Mm-hmm. When he comes out, he and Debbie get married and they're together, happily married until she passed away a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And that's the story as presented in the documentary. And, we're to believe that these people believe this, but there's other facts. You say something, John?
No, you were getting into the other facts, and I think I found it fascinating that the other facts actually make it slightly more believable if you knew all the other facts, and yet they omitted some of the most supportive details that would lend more credence to the story.
Oh, what do you think?
And two, while we're talking about it, I think the part they're not addressing necessarily is that maybe it's not demonic possession, But if the parties involved believe it is, then that is the problem, although it's only due to a mental problem in the person. So
Sure.
for that person, in their mind, in their world, that is why they did it.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that's really why they did it, right? So
No, but it could be a delusion. It could be categorized
exactly.
as
You can be
a
so
mental
terrified, you
illness.
believe it so fully. I mean, there are people have, I guess, died of fear. They're so afraid or they're so distraught and have a panic attack. If you believe something strongly enough, it's real to you, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. I guess I don't know where we go
The
with
way
that,
Will
though,
saying,
because-
he does not agree. That's
Well,
but it means no.
I'm not buying it.
I'm trying to think. I mean, obviously the law exists in a way that as a gatekeeper, right? Because someone can come in and say, I was flying on a dragon and, the dragon's the one that, stole the car or whatever.
Right.
It's like, all right, now what? All right.
Where's the limit?
Well, I'm not saying the person is not still culpable for the act.
Right.
I don't even think it's
Okay.
a defense, but they can be telling the truth and it still be not factual.
Oh, I see. I got you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, to that extent, I'm going to present you with some other things to consider to decide
Lay
whether
on.
or not these folks were telling the truth.
Okay.
Certainly.
In a 2007 lawsuit, David's older brother, Carl, and David filed a lawsuit in which they said that David was actually mentally ill.
Okay.
So David and Carl
buy
said
that.
this.
Mm-hmm.
Although the family seemed like to John's point, the family claimed that he was possessed. Later, David's father claimed that wasn't true. And in fact, what's interesting in the documentary, I played you that clip of the exorcism, and you hear, them telling, get out, and he's saying to his mom, fuck you, and all this kind of crazy stuff. You'll burn in hell. Carl, the interesting about the documentary, I don't know if you got this far, John. It's kind of a twist for folks, I guess, who are buying into the first part of it is Carl Jr., who's the older brother, is kind of the last 25 to 30% of the documentary. And he's telling all these stories from his perspective. And one of them was, he said, you saw that exorcism and my brother would act out and they would be commanding him, the demon, get out. And he wouldn't listen. My father, at some point, who hung back and was like, I don't believe any of this bullshit. At some point, he just comes storming into the room, grabs my brother, smacks him and says, cut this shit out. We've had enough of it.
Wow.
And he goes and the brother goes and sits on the couch and suddenly he's back to normal. So he said he wouldn't listen to a priest, the demon, but he listened to his father. So,
oh my gosh. Wow.
Because if we're to believe that is the actual fact of what happened, then that suggests that he was continuing to act out in this way as long as someone was believing it and humoring it.
Yes.
And then maybe the father was like, come on, you dipshit, quit it. And he's just like, okay, Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dad.
To that end, on the documentary, oh, no, I'm sorry, son. Go on, please continue. Carl also tells tells a story that, what was I going to say? Shit, now I forgot. Talking about, you said something, John, and made me think about it. The father, he's only listening to the father. Oh,
someone was entertaining his
somebody
delusion.
else. Yeah.
Yes. To that end, Carl tells a story that he said when they brought the Warrens in, Lorraine and Ed were telling his mother how a child would behave if they were possessed. Well, they would do this and they would do this. And he said, now, it was curious to me, and he's older. He was 15 at the time. He said, it was odd to me that they didn't send the kids away. Instead, they had David there while they're saying this. He said, so of course, David heard how he was supposed to behave if he were to be believed to be possessed.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah.
And at the very least, you think you'd want to spare a child, that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
Right.
Instead, it was director's
Right.
notes.
Again, and to play the devil's advocate, unless he already knew how a demon would behave because it was in him.
possibly, yeah. I mean,
That's
I
a
guess the
stretch,
implication-
admittedly. I get
Right.
that.
The question is, had he been growling and swearing at his mother prior?
Yeah.
Right.
But they didn't address that directly.
Well,
Right.
but there's before the exorcism, there was certainly footage of him just in his home with Polaroids, and they're holding a little tape recorder up to his face, and he's acting out in that same way, which my understanding of the chronology is that this was pre-exorcism, although we've now learned there were multiple exorcisms. So
Yeah.
That's the problem with the partial accuracy of this documentary, is that it's easy to misconstrue without all the information.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I guess, I'm reading while listening to you at the same time. You remind me of something and then I forget. Because I'm going to keep saying Carl told a story. What were you saying, Carl? I mean, about.
But before that, I was talking about the photographs of the audio recordings of him.
Yes.
Right. Oh, yes.
Yes.
Carl pointed out, he said, he thought he found it very strange that the Warrens seemed more interested in recording and photographing the son than helping him.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
And he thought, and again, the implication being that a lot of it seemed performative. Once the cameras went on and the recorder started going. Anyway, well, what else did I want to tell you? Okay. Yeah. So, according to something, I don't have the source for this, but this is something I read, and I'll find the source and put it up for you. But that the Warrens played a role in helping create what the defense was. Now, I guess that's assumed, right? They go to the attorney and say, this guy was possessed, and we could vouch for that, I suppose. And he's like, okay, cool. We'll put you on the stand and we'll get you. Of course, that never really happened.
Right.
I already told you about about the fight. Yeah. And okay. So, and again, the fight between Johnson and Bono happens months later.
Yeah.
Months and months later. And Wanda, who I mentioned was one of the family members, one of the girls that was hanging out with them at this lunch, she recounted the events to the police, saying that Mary ran for the car as Debbie attempted to mitigate the situation by standing between the two of them. Wanda tries to pull Johnson away. Johnson growls like an animal, draws his knife, and then repeatedly stabs Bono.
Wow.
Who suffers from 4 or 5 tremendous wounds, mostly to his chest. Yeah, I'm being duplicative now. Let's see. All right, so blah, blah, blah. I know there was I'm leading up to something here. Oh, okay. So here, before I tell you one more, another thing from the documentary that I thought was really interesting. Like I mentioned, this story's been covered many different times. In 1983, there was an NBC TV movie that, again, roughly covers the same events. Of course, they take some liberties, and some of it's kind of more wild and more lo-fi, certainly, than the documentary. They changed the names of the people in the case. And in fact, Arnie Johnson, the Arnie Johnson analog is played by a very young post-Friday the 13th Kevin Bacon.
Oh, yeah.
And the Warrens are played by, let's see, I've got it here. Where is it? Did I pass it up already? This is part of my challenge reading without my glasses.
Right. Hold it away further. Further. Hey, how about those goggles you have around your neck? Maybe those will help.
They're not
prescription goggles?
No.
They're for when you have to weld on things very, very small.
I just got these on the wrong order. The Warrens are played by, or the Warren stand-ins are played by Andy Griffith and Beverly McKinsey.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
In 1983, this is when we get the book. Jared Brittle, with the assistance of Lorraine Warren, publishes a book about the incident called Devil in Connecticut. Lorraine Warren stated the profits from the book were shared with the family. It was either $2,000 or $4,500, depending on the source, as to how much goes to the family by the book publisher, whereas the Warrens received $81,000, according to Time magazine. In the documentary, the Glatzels, including David, are still pretty bitter about how the Warrens seem to make out, and they did not in the ultimate licensing of this story. Carl, to his point, he tells a story in the documentary that he says that the Warrens told the author, "This is how we want the story to go." The author did research talking to the family and went back to the Warrens and said, but that's not what happened. They said that's not true. And they said, make it scary. Our books sell when they're scary. That's according to Greg.
Yeah. I mean, that's suspect, but it doesn't. So something's really bothering me. So I'm going to rewind just a little bit. Remember you said that they were upset that the Warrens were more interested in taking photos and recording audio than actually performing the exorcism. And I agree with that intellectually. But whenever I hear something that's so cut and dried, part of me goes, yeah, but how would that play out? So what if it were real? And they performed the exorcism and they fixed everything.
Right.
And they go, where's your proof? And go, oh, we didn't record it. You were there and didn't take a single picture, didn't record any audio.
Yeah.
If the Warrens have seen the things the Warrens claim to have seen, to prevent themselves from being labeled as crackpots, they need to document this stuff or they're going to be labeled as crackpots. So
good point.
Yeah.
Don't you think you need, if you were in their position, wouldn't you also grab a little footage, record a little stuff to prove that you're not just bananas?
That's a completely fair point. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree in that regard. Yeah. And I guess not having been there, I don't know to what extent. I mean, you see the pictures. It looks like they've got a mic near the kid's face.
Yeah.
I mean, who was recording it? Who was taking the pictures? I guess if the Warrens were doing that themselves, then maybe, All right, put the camera down. Let somebody else do that. But maybe they were doing it that way. But with regard to the book, when the book was republished in 2006, David, the possessed kid, and his brother Carl sued the authors and book publishers for violating their right to privacy, libel, and, quote, intentional affliction of emotional distress. Carl also claims that the story, Possession Story, was a hoax concocted by Ed and Lorraine, as I mentioned, to exploit the family and his brother's mental illness. And the book presented him, Carl, as the villain because he didn't believe in it. Nonsense that they were saying. He said he asserted that the Warren, this is also in the documentary, he says that the Warrens told his family, look, when this book comes out, you're going to be millionaires. And we're going to get, and it's going to help, and this Possession Story is going to help keep Arnie out of jail. Of course, none of that became true.
Right.
They didn't make out and Johnson went to jail.
Yeah.
Glatzel's father, Carl Sr., denies he ever said to the author that his son was possessed.
Wow.
Really?
The book conveys it that way.
Okay.
He's got pretty far down the road to go back and say, I never even said it.
Right. Yeah.
In The Haunting, which is another reenactment of this story for some TV show years ago. I want to say it was in the 90s. But they also tell this same story. In that version, a few days after Johnson egged on the demon that I mentioned to you during the exorcism, he was attacked, he claims, by the demon, which took control of his car while he was driving it and forced him to drive into a tree.
Okay.
After that incident, Johnson says he returned to the rental property.
They do.
Whoopty.
Maybe it was a foreign car.
You will drive a Ford or nothing.
It was the early 80s. He was driving a Japanese car, and this demon was like, "Buy American."
Buy American. That's how he said it.
Yeah.
The demon was going to just run it out of gas, but it's so fuel efficient. He just chose a tree.
Now, with regard to the Warrens, this isn't the first of all, you can look up stuff about Ed Warren. He's got some Jeffrey Jones type allegations against him involving a young woman, which you can look up. But that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the veracity of these stories. Like John said, maybe they really did have these encounters that, that they documented. But this is not the first time that they've had a scandal like this. Similarly, like I mentioned, they were involved in the Amityville horror. In that story, just shortly, I want to say it's Ronald DeFeo murders his entire family at this particular home. I think it's in 75, I want to say, or 74. And the next year, the Warrens are brought in to investigate. They say it's got, evil spirits and demons, etc. A year later, this new family buys the home and, starts having all these crazy experiences. Which is the subject of the story of the Amityville horror. But that's, I've got years here. 74 was DeFeo. 75, the Lutz family moves in.
Yep.
But in September of 1979 issue of People magazine, William Weber, who was, I believe he was the DeFeo's attorney. Now, they were saying that DeFeo was probably possessed by a demon. That's why he murdered his whole family. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
It does.
But William Weber, again, the defense attorney, I believe he's the defense attorney for DeFeo, said, quote, in People magazine, "I know this book is a hoax. We created this horror story over many bottles of wine."
Wow.
Okay.
And this refers to a meeting that Weber had with George and Kathy Lutz, during which they discussed what would become the outline of Jay Anson's book. So there
Wow.
you go. Now, finally, John, what's interesting to me in the documentary is the final story that Carl tells is he says that when he was doing some cleaning up with his wife, he came across some letters or journals that his mother kept. He said that his mother documented everything that she did because she had OCD. It was part of her, focus was to do these things. And one of the things she documented was, and he presented one of these handwritten notes, was how she would give the children, her family rather, their medicine every night. And one of these journal entries was, gave the family their medicine, everybody slept well. Do you have a sound for that?
No, I was wide-eyed, and then I realized you couldn't tell I was wide-eyed, so I had
see
to,
your wide eyes.
So I had to show you my surprise.
Perfect.
What he said he remembers is that his mother would routinely give he and his brothers and his father Sominex every day. Wow. And one of the dangers of Sominex is prolonged use, and they had it for years, is hallucinations.
Wow. Uh-huh. Okay.
So, of course, David, who now is saying he's possessed, in spite of the fact that I told you in 2007 he had a lawsuit where he's saying he was mentally ill,
Right.
said that his brother is wrong, that their mother loved them and she would never do such a thing. Now, again, Carl has this journal that's handwritten by his mother that says this. Anyway, so there you go, John. You talked about facts and how they're presented and et cetera and so on. By the time you get to the end of the documentary, I think you have a more complete story. Criticism of the documentary that I've seen is that some of the audio that we've heard that John mentioned, some of the photos are ginned up. That
really,
if you find the raw audio, or if you listen to the audio in the movie, you hear some extra growling. You hear some music underneath it, of course, because it's make it like very cinematic. Yeah. And it seems to me when I listen to like that clip I played you just there, it seems to me that this is just me off the top of my head, so it might not be correct. They edited it in such a way that there was more of David and more call and response, where like the mother was saying, "It's me, mommy," and he's saying, "Fuck you, go to hell." Kind of like, Linda Blair's Reagan in Exorcist.
Right.
Whereas when you listen to the actual tape, he's not saying as much as it presented, it seems to me.
Oh, okay. Like maybe he's just spewing this profanity and not necessarily in response to any one individual. He's just acting out, you think, or
no, not necessarily. But
or just the volume is not so much.
Yes, volume not as in level. You mean as in quantity? Yes,
quantity right.
Not so,
Yeah.
And the photos, they make three-dimensional and sort of interactive. They're moving around in these images, and some of them, if you didn't have the context they portrayed, you wouldn't necessarily know what it's about. Like there's an image, I think it's of Arnie. What looks like he's wrestling with David. It could be playfully. It could be that he's holding him down because there's a demon inside him. You don't know. Right. But they present it as if he had to hold his brother down or his brother-in-law down. That sort of thing. That's the criticism I've seen of it. And other criticism suggesting that the documentarians weren't objective in their presentation. I don't know that I agree with that because, again, the latter half of the documentary is Carl's side of the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's balanced. It sounds like.
Yeah. Well, I think that would be a hard hurdle to clear if they give any credence whatsoever to this entirely unbelievable to the majority of the population that anything like this could even happen. So I could see how you go, oh, well, if you even entertained it, it's possible you're skewed toward the paranormal. I mean, that in itself would be a bias if you chose to determine it's not possible. It depends who you ask. Some people would say, well, it's fact. Is it fact? Is it fact that this is not real? I think that's the problem. We don't know. That's what makes it paranormal. It's not normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I love about the paranormal. Is that right? It's not that I necessarily believe it's true. It's that you can't prove it's not. So there's a possibility of something extra normal out there that I find fascinating.
Yeah, but that's dangerous, right? I mean, just generally in logic.
Only if you're an idiot. Are you saying I'm dangerous because I entertain the possibility?
No, what I'm saying is...
There's lots of other reasons.
I know you know this, but for everybody else, it's not the role of someone to prove your thing is not true. It's your job to prove it is true. So someone who asserts I was possessed by a demon, you can't prove that I wasn't. Well, that's not my burden. Your burden is to prove you were possessed by a demon. So when you say like the possibility of these things exist because you can't prove they're not true, well, whoever believes those things has to prove they are true.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? I mean,
in legal forums, sure.
Mm-hmm.
No, it should be beyond that. I mean, that's the kind of problem we're in, I think, right? With all this sort of misinformation and people willing to believe whatever.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't believe it's so cut and dried. So I'm entertaining possibilities.
What I do think, John, is it's very exciting to believe in these kinds of possibilities. You know, it's life can seem, not lately, but life can seem pretty boring and mundane. And to believe in these other things, it makes it really exciting.
Oh, for sure.
I'll give you that. That's true. That's fair.
All right.
Yep.